Before we get started, this video is sponsored by FaB Foundry, one of the first Flesh and Blood specialized game stores in the world, a pillar of the local FaB community in Portland, Oregon, a world tour organizer, and my personal favorite LGS. FaB Foundry is your one-stop shop for all things FaB related, whether that's singles, sealed product, playmats, sleeves, dice and tokens, especially featuring products from Metal FaB and Thai cards. FaB Foundry also offers a rewards program, which you can use to get store credit back on all your purchases. So please go check out FaB Foundries, support our local community in Portland, and use our promo code FleshandBad for a discount on your next singles order.
It's not yet lethal. Andrew can fall to 1.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
There's Tiger Swipe at the end of all of this. It's going to be 3 into 4 into 5, and it's going to be Evan Herndon going ahead and declaring himself U.S. national champion. It is going to get the fist bump, and that
incredible finish.
Finds the best deck in the format, he says, and I believe him. Looked very, very impressive all day long on ZEN. You've shown the world now what ZEN is capable of. What do you think your deck is going to have in terms of an effect on the rest of the world's meta?
I think a lot more people are going to start playing ZEN. I think it was underplayed this weekend, even though it was the most played deck.
So that comes in for 4. Because he's got the +1 from the previous out of 4.
Oh, wow.
And then
Talishar kills it.
Talishar wins the game.
Well, I grinded matchups for 7 hours yesterday, and then I grinded matchups for 7 hours the day before that, all trying to beat ZEN. Newsflash, nothing beats ZEN.
6.
Card remaining.
We going wide,
And that
Robert just decides that is it. Zachary is your Australian Nationals champion 2024.
Why it plays in, right? There's the damage of that deck is really, really good.
His hand's empty. I think Sunny's got a pretty good idea right now that they might be Canada's national champion this year.
And you're just gonna get free wins, honestly, with ZEN, which is kind of insane because of what the deck does.
Let's go take a peek at that bracket. Let's see what we ended up with in our top 8.
Looks like we have a whopping 6 ZEN players here.
It might honestly just be the best deck in format. Maybe.
Okay, yeah. I think this game is it's probably over.
That is a big reason to play ZEN. And you know, to not trick yourself like Brendan's saying to playing something that maybe isn't that.
And he's trying for 7. Okay. And that's it. Well, that's it. Jin is our national champion this year.
I mean, they already printed like infinite cards that keeps out in check. I remember at the beginning of the cycle, we were like, why does all of this hate exist? Like, why would we even consider this deck?
And then you put all the hate in one deck and you still don't win.
Upon the release of Part the Mistfail, ZEN immediately started dominating the game's highest level competitive events, in contrast to the initial impressions of the hero at release. The question is, how did the Betsy of MST become the boogeyman of Classic Constructed so quickly? I'll attempt to examine that in this section, starting with his very first LL points, but before we delve into the early history of ZEN, I wanted to give some added context to the meta around MS2 release. In addition to the 3 brand new heroes which all saw play, Victor, Azalea, Kano, and Levia all received powerful tools in the new set. Victor got Visit the Goldmain Estate, a powerful mid to late game tool for generating might and gold tokens to push tons of damage. Longdraw Half Glove was printed for Azalea, allowing her to bypass the effects of Warmonger's Diplomacy for a turn. Kano got one of his most powerful combo cards, Kindle, allowing him to amp Aether Wildfire for additional damage and reach while adding a fair bit of sequencing difficulty to the deck. And finally, Levia got Shadowrealm Horror, a decent on-rate auto-include that also has a very solid high roll potential. In addition to the aforementioned heroes, Prism and KO were still around, proving to be surprisingly decent meta threats given the right draws. We'll talk a bit more about how the meta evolved later, but at the very beginning of MST, it seemed, for the most part, wide open, much like heavy hitters. The first confirmed person to achieve LL points for Zen was Jake Warburton at Small Pro Plus at the UK Birmingham Games Expo on August 1st. While this was the day after MST released, the list would become surprisingly predictive of later Zen lists, and the card choices capture a lot of the early sentiments and deck building ideas. Lovingly titled FaB 2, the deck was not running Bonds of Ancestry, instead opting for a lower blue count and a higher amount of Go Again and Tiger synergy. Art of War, as we discussed earlier, was a well-known power card in Zen at the time, and created a powerful combo with Traverse and Strides block, allowing for profoundly wide chains that were difficult to block and push tons of damage. This list also main decked a powerful tool in the mirror, Censor. Censor was also notably pretty good against both Azalea and Nu, allowing for a 2-card 7 with weapon and the ability to name potent threats like Red Ledger or Codex Frailty. The sideboard of this deck was also very simple: 3 Oasis presumably for Kano, 3 This Rounds on Me for the mirror, and finally 3 Warmonger's Diplomacy for Azalea. FaB 2 was a pretty fair deck by Zen standards. However, decks during National Season deviated from this initial idea of a Tiger Zen and went in a significantly more unfair direction. As we discussed earlier, Tog from We Make Best had released a video outlining his version of a Bonds Zen, running 9 copies of Bonds of Ancestry in order to set up a massively wide combat chain. Many pro teams took inspiration from Tog's original video, as well as the several other Bonds of Ancestry lists floating around, and refined them to perfection.
Lucas watched the We Make Best video, and we just made a simple list that put 9 copies of Bonds of Ancestry in, and I tried it for literally 2 games, and then I said, this might be the best deck ever printed, and it's going to warp the entire format.
Zen on release was one of the most broken heroes ever printed. The average Zen game would go something like this. First, you find your Transcend card in the first few turns and put an energy in your deck. Then you somehow manage to get a few copies of Bonds of Ancestry in your graveyard, either by blocking with them or by playing them. You then wait to draw Art of War, which is basically your power card in Zen. Your opponent eventually attacks you, and you block with Traverse and Strides to form the 7-card Zen hand. You then deal 30 to 40 damage to your opponent by playing multiple copies of Bonds of Ancestry in the same turn, normally around turn 5 or 6 in the average game. Now, above average Zen games could look quite a bit different, a bit closer to this. Let's say you draw Chi on your first turn of the game, and then draw Art of War on your second turn of the game. Your opponent attacks into you because it's turn 2, and you can't win by not attacking. You then block with Traverse and Strides. You maybe draw an Orihone, or a second Art of War, or Levels of Enlightenment, or a Sacred Art, or hit off Ancestral Harmony, or Shifting Winds of the Mystic Beast plus Flusterfist, or any other myriad of insane combo cards. You then kill your opponent on maybe turn 2 or turn 3. The above scenario was not a once-in-a-lifetime draw. It was a fairly consistent thing to happen with refined Zen deck lists. Zen could simply kill you whenever he wanted if you ever presented an attack without any disruption to his 7-card hand. And if you chose not to attack in, Zen could simply outvalue you with consistent damage. It's not that Zen could kill you in 5 turns if the stars aligned, it's that Zen's core game plan could consistently kill many decks by turn 5. Zen's strength was that he was an aggro combo deck that preyed on slower decks that couldn't output the damage or disruption needed to kill him before he could set up his combo. But whenever there is a top deck, in response the meta will shift to counter it. Despite having access to some of the best numbers in the game, there were 5 main ways you could attempt to beat Zen. First, you could go faster, which was mostly showcased by decks like Dash.io, KO, or Prism. The next strategy was to disrupt Zen every turn of the game. This was mostly showcased by decks like Nu, Azalea, and Victor. Nu specifically had 30 to 40 disruption effects that made it very difficult for Zen to keep a 7-card hand. Azalea had very powerful on-hits like Red Ledger or Remorseless that could slow down Zen's super wide turns. And Victor had access to Chokeslam, Spinal Crush, CNC, and Pummel, which could all ruin his Zen turn under the right circumstances. Another strategy that some decks employed was not attacking into Traverse and Strides. Mostly this was showcased by wizards like Kano, the only wizard at the time, and also by Fatigue decks. Some Fatigue decks would basically just try not to attack into Traverse and Strides and just try to block out everything Zen was doing. Another niche strategy was to destroy Zen's armor, which was mostly siloed to heroes in the Mechanologist class with effects like T-Bone and Magnetic Shockwave. And finally, the 5th and perhaps the best way to counter Zen was to play Zen yourself and draw better. Going into the national season, these were the predominant strategies, and for some decks these worked. As new lists became more refined and Zen lists were at most running 3 of Snag, the matchup did become more and more favored for Nu, as she was able to capture a few national wins. However, beyond Nu, there weren't really a lot of standout decks that could consistently beat Zen. The deck at this point was possible to tech for, but Zen was very resilient to disruption due to the 7-block fridge. Most disruptive decks had to cross this threshold in order to break through to deny the combo turn. And if the disruptive deck ever bricked or missed lining up disruption, Zen could capitalize on the tempo. By the time national season started 2 weeks later on August 14th, for the most part the cat, Zen, was out of the bag, Bonds of Ancestry good. The evidence was everywhere, from the show match between Team Blue Pitch and the card guys to We Make Best 9 Bond Zen video, to screenshots in the purple Discord of 50 plus damage turns on turn 2. However, refining the build would prove to be especially challenging given how large the card pool for Ninja was. The earliest national event would be in the US, 1 week before all other nationals, and by this point all eyes were on Zen, whether that was to play him or to counter him.
honestly, this format is kind of evolving a lot, I think, and the dynamic that I think ZEN is kind of like the center of the dynamic in this format, honestly, like as much as whether it's one of the best decks of all time, whether it's actually that powerful, whether it's actually that broken, or it's just a really, really good deck. I don't think it kind of matters. I just think it is kind of the dynamic of the format.
Eventually, US Nationals started, and we got a look at the Zen lists that pro teams had developed. During Nationals, there were 3 main Zen decks that stood out to me as meta-defining. First being Evan Herndon's first place list running 6 copies of Bonds of Ancestry and the Chase Aspect line. The second list was Michael Dalton's list that got 3rd place and was running 9 copies of Bonds of Ancestry. And the third list, or perhaps the most unique list, was the Car Guys Wolfpack list, which ended up going 7-1 in the Zen mirror. Each of these decks offered a unique take on Zen, which would become a recurring trend in Zen's history. Evan Herndon's list was all about efficient turns and consistency, running fewer bonds and more hand-smoothing cards like Harmony Hunt and Spinning Wheel Kick. Michael Dalton's list was a bit more all-in, aiming to set up huge multi-bonds of Ancestry turns while also having a potent high roll with Shifting Winds of the Mystic Beast plus Flusterfist as a makeshift Salt the Wound. However, one of the coolest lists at the time was the Car Guys Wolfpack list, focused on breaking the Zen mirror.
So regarding my Surging Strike list that I brought to US Nats, there were definitely a couple of things different than everyone else's in the field. First off, I played Breeze Rider Boots because we realized that we wanted to combo off with bonds, so we need a Whelming Gust Wave. Gust Wave won't have Go Again, so we used Breeze Rider Boots to give it Go Again on our combo turns. We were actually able to dishonor our opponent's Zens, pretty much turning their Transcend cards into doing nothing, which was awesome. The deck itself was so cool. We had Ornate, Tessin, and Kadachi. The idea was we wanted to activate Zen. We'd have 1 resource floating. We're like, let's Ornate Tessin this Tiger to the bottom of the deck and find more gas. Because the whole deck itself, no matter what card you drew, it was probably going to be good instead of that Tiger. Now, that doesn't mean we weren't Art of Warring Tigers away or anything like that. When we drew Art of War, we're still going to get rid of our Tiger and stuff like that. But the idea was like, hey, I'm having a combo turn. I didn't draw Art of War. I don't need this Tiger. My deck does nothing to do with Tigers. I'm just going to try to find another Bonds. And there was 9 in the deck. And guess what? You found it a lot of the time. It's what it felt like. But yeah, our deck was such a unique thing because I wanted to add the Bonds power, but I wanted to add on hits with the Dishonor and Whelming Gust Wave, and it worked really well for that one tournament. Would I play it again? I would play a fixed version.
Zen would end up being the most represented hero at many of the larger Nationals events, but he didn't see the overwhelming gap in representation like KO saw in heavy hitters. For how overwhelmingly strong the deck was, he was paradoxically a bit underrepresented.
So just to dig in a couple of the numbers, we mentioned it before, but Zen had 5 wins out of about 15 Nationals that have happened so far, which is 30%, which is like one of the weaker tier 1 decks that we've seen so far, but we still have, 2 out of 3 weeks to go.
While US Nationals set the stage for the rest of National season, I also think it's worth looking at some of the other Nationals winning Zen lists from around the world. Imad Kashi's UK Nationals winning Zen list was running Talshar the Last Prince, perhaps drawing inspiration from Jake Warburton's initial list at the UK Games Expo. He was also running many targeted tech cards for Zen's more challenging matchups. Jin Han To from Singapore Nationals dropped Talshar entirely for Zephyr Needles and only opted for core Bonds of Ancestry while including E-Strike, a unique choice at the time. He also opted for Mask of the Pouncing Lynx over additional AB in the Kano matchup for more aggression. Zachary Gardner, winner of the Australian Nationals, perhaps was a time traveler from the future, opting for only 3 copies of Bonds of Ancestry and That All You Got as a powerful card draw tool to both the Mirror and Assassins. The final list I want to touch on is from Justin Koo, winner of the Philippines Nationals, who had many spicy inclusions of his own. From more reasonable spice like Flick Flack and the package of Swan plus Flusterfist to a callback to Zen's predecessor Katsu by running Breaking Scales, presumably for the 1 battle worn to dodge armor disruption. From my personal research, Zen ended up winning 15 Nationals out of 45, having an exceedingly strong showing at larger events like in the UK, US, Poland, Singapore, Australia, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Canada Nationals, and picking up smaller wins in Luxembourg, Norway, Ireland, Sweden, Thailand, Hungary, and Belgium. Officially, LSS mentioned there were 14 wins for Zen. I'm not entirely sure which is correct.
Yeah, awesome results. And yeah, Zen coming out on top.
Yes.
14 wins total.
Yeah, yeah, 14 out of 45, pretty solid effort. and you can just see the power of the deck on the stream.
LSS has a tendency to coincide national season with the release of a new set, and in some ways there are a lot of benefits to doing this. Players get to have a fresh meta and the ability to showcase deck building creativity, which in tandem with good fundamentals can lead to very cool moments. However, in the span of 6 weeks, Zen had achieved 445 LL points, or nearly half of his total LL points, leading players to question whether or not the cards and decks they just purchased would even be playable. At the current rate, Zen would LL within a couple months, and LSS eventually had to revisit Zen's power level. With the conclusion of national season, LSS knew there was a problem. Zen was the best deck in format, and not by a slim margin, but by a very wide differential. With how strong the deck was, players wanted answers, and LSS needed to act immediately to balance the game. There are a few standout cards that the devs and the community considered for the chopping block. Art of War was the card that was most frequently cited as a potential ban target. It directly contributed to the consistency and power of Zen's spike turns. However, there was a level of apprehension among some in the community about the ban. The card at this point was a staple generic, like Command & Conquer or Enlightened Strike, printed in the second ever set. It was used in several heroes as a key piece to make their turns stand out, and the inherent risk of dead draws combined with the modal nature of the card made it very skill testing outside of Zen. Art of War being banned would collaterally nerf several other decks like Levia, Katsu, and FaB. While it was a clear power outlier, there was definitely a sense that the card was too iconic to be banned. Ancestral Harmony was also discussed as a potential soft ban. The logic behind this was that banning the card would remove the high roll of a random card draw combined with an Anthem effect and a Transcend starter, while keeping the deck largely the same. The counterpoint here is that doing a soft ban like this would be all too similar to the ban of Bullseye Bracer. Holy shit. The counterpoint here is that doing a soft ban like this would be all too similar to the ban of Bullseye Bracers and Lexi, a ban that would decrease the ceiling of Zen's turns but didn't address the consistency of the turns themselves. Bonds of Ancestry and Descendant Gustwave were also potential ban targets, both of which contributed to how wide Zen's chains were going.
I think giving the deck that automatically tutors with blues 0 for 7s was not a good design at all, especially when you make one resource for Descendant Gustwave when you transcended, which was a gnarly design.
With Bonds of Ancestry being able to recur itself or Descendant Gustwave, Zen could create chains that could often play 3 to 4 copies of Bonds of Ancestry on a given turn. The only issue with this ban was that, like most other bans on the list, banning the cards would outright kill Katsu. At this point in LSS's history, there was also never a partial ban or a hero-specific ban. Either all colors of a card were legal or they weren't. So many feared that removing all 9 copies of Bonds would kill both Zen and Katsu. Many also pointed to Descendant Gustwave as a ban target, since Katsu had only Gustwave, but this would also functionally remove the on-hit of Dishonor, removing an iconic piece of Katsu's kit. Traverse the Universe was another power outlier, and functionally broke 2 heroes, Enigma and Zen. However, banning a brand new legendary, and especially a legendary with a cold foil full art treatment, would ruin a lot of consumer trust in the game. Up until this point, there was only one legendary ever banned in CC, Crown of Seeds, which was banned long after the heroes who could play it had reached Living Legend status. Banning a high-priced legendary a month after release was simply not a viable option. Levels of Enlightenment was also discussed as being a ubiquitously powerful card across all 3 Mystic heroes. But again, banning a $100 extended art card feels pretty bad. The other issue was that while Levels of Enlightenment was a very powerful card, it wasn't an enabler for Zen's power turns in the same way that other potential ban targets were. It was adding power to Zen's already powerful turns, but not creating those turns in and of itself. Strides of Reprisal was also scrutinized for the ban list, as the Tiger going to hand was almost exclusively used for banishing to Art of War, and there existed a functional alternative in the form of Pouncing Paws, which added a Tiger to banish instead. Banning Strides would make it harder to create the 7-card Zen hand, but there existed workarounds like activating Zen's hero power to make the Tiger instead. This ban would make it slightly more difficult to sequence the deck, but the overall impact this ban would have to the Art of War turn would be minimal. The last idea that a few people came up with was to potentially ban 1 to 2 Transcend cards to limit how frequently you can Transcend in Zen, as New and Enigma didn't use all 9 Transcend cards. However, this was also vague and a bit hard to implement. Which Transcend cards would you ban, if any? The effects on each of these cards are relatively minor. The main issue is how many there are, which increases the odds of transcending early. Banning 1 to 2 Transcend cards would make it less likely for you to transcend, but when you do transcend, the deck hasn't really fundamentally changed. Important to note, like many of the other cards we've discussed thus far, there is a tension between Flesh and Blood as a game and as a product. Banning full art, Marvel, Transcend cards could leave a bad impression on the collectability of the game, even if it could theoretically improve the gameplay. Finally, after internal discussion and testing, the decision was made on July 8th, 2024 to ban blue and yellow Bonds of Ancestry in Classic Constructed. This was a shock to many, as this was the first time that LSS restricted a specific color of a card instead of banning the entire card outright. The implication of this ban was obviously an immediate reduction in power for the current Zen list, whether they were on 6 bonds or all 9 bonds. For the 9 Bond Zen list, which are often running 7 Descending Gust Waves and even a few shifting ones of the Mystic Beast, this functionally freed up about 8 to 12 slots in the deck. Instead of frequently being able to get double bonds turns, assuming you had the graveyard set up, you really only had the potential for 1 double bonds turn, and even that wasn't super consistent. I think overall most people are excited about this ban and hope that it would bring down Zen's power to a more fair level. However, for the most part, the problematic portions of Zen still remained.
I kind of had a controversial take on this, I think. Did a podcast episode where I expressed those feelings. I mostly thought that this change was like pretty good for like local levels of play, making the game a little more enjoyable. But I don't know. I think this change was like largely unimpactful. Like Zen was still able to output 40 damage turns. He still had a 7 armor to not be super interactable. So I found that change to be pretty disappointing. I thought it was way too close to the Pro Tour. And it kind of like still forced you into playing Art of War. I really wish they just hit Art of War earlier.
What Yuki and I did after they banned blue and yellow bonds was we were just kind of like, what does this do to the deck? And we went home and we played some new Zen games. And I was like, nothing changed. This hero's still fucking insane. And I think the conclusion I drew half the time was like, I think they might have just made some people's decks better by making them take like 9 bonds out.
The Bonds ban limited how wide the comic chain could go, but one hidden cost to the Bonds of Ancestry line was that you would often have some clunky hands that didn't function independently without cheat. With the ban of Bonds, decks became much more reminiscent of Evan Herndon's US Nats list. Most were still auto-including 3 red Bonds of Ancestry and 5 to 6 copies of Descending Gustwave. However, now decks had room for 4 to 10 new cards, and many lists opted to include the Chase Aspect line. Chase the Tail was previously sometimes cut from Zen lists, but it now became one of the more efficient sources of damage. And much like Evan Herndon's deck, many aggressive go-again cards like Growl, Spinning Wheel Kick, and Bittering Thorns began to see more play. With the absence of blue bonds, many efficient Transcend starters entered the deck, like Wind Chakra and Biting Breeze, enabling you to transcend much more consistently. While these bans ended up lowering the ceiling of Zen, the improved consistency from these new cards drastically increased the floor. This led to much more consistent turn-to-turn damage while still maintaining the ability to perform the 7-card hand pop-up turn.
Personally, I don't like 9 bonds build. I run around 6 to 7 at the time I'm testing. And I think the all-in 9 bonds into Fluster Fist or Fluster Fist combo is too risky or too breaky to play with. You don't have to do that. You just draw 1 to 2 bond and you have an Art of Photo, and that's all it takes. So with the ban, every people is forcing to play a more consistent list instead of the ultra high roll build. So it actually makes the decks better.
Yeah, I was surprised when he first mentioned that. Like, I remember after the first ban, I think Puddin and Alan tested it for a few days, and then they told us that I think that they think that the deck got better, and it's probably the best deck to bring in to Calling Manila. And then I was like, what? Like, it cannot be real. But then when I try it, and then it turns out the deck is way more consistent. You don't have to be high rolled with 9 bonds.
Despite losing access to 6 incredibly powerful cards, the deck somehow got better. This increase in the deck's floor was perhaps best exemplified by 2 decks from Pro Tour Amsterdam: Bartosz Ziemba's 2nd place Pro Tour list and Charles Dunn's 1st place Calling list. Running 3 Bonds of Ancestry and 5 Descending Gust Waves, these lists didn't quite have the insane ceiling as before, but the decks offered a much more aggressive and consistent mid-range package. As we discussed earlier, Chase Aspect was now back in favor, with a reduced reliance on bonds. Both lists were also on Battle God, a powerful card in the mirror and into Assassins, and the weakest link cemented itself as a powerful disruptive effect into Mystic Heroes, Mechanologists, Illusionists, and Brutes. These lists also both featured small defensive packages, a unique evolution from the previous all-in bonds lists. Charles Dunn opted for 2 copies of Sink Below as a powerful cycling card to dig 1 card deeper towards Transcendent Art of War. Bartosz, on the other hand, went with 2 copies of Waxon, which may have seen play before this point, but this was in my memory the first time the card made an appearance as anti-assassin tech. Waxon could be a powerful tool to cover attack reactions like Justinig, a 0-for-5 assassin power card newly introduced in MST. Compared with Waxons, Bartosz also ran a single copy of Snag as extra insurance against assassins, which were a more potent meta threat at this point. Bartosz Ziemba's 2nd place Pro Tour list, the more prestigious of the 2 tournaments, and Charles Dunn's 1st place Calling list cemented Zen as a top meta hero. Even after the Bonds of Ancestry ban, Zen was still the deck to beat, and these two lists not only influenced Zen deck building at the time, but also influenced other decks who now had to figure out new ways to counter. During this period, I had also made an AGE top 8 with this new version of Zen, and made Zen history by becoming the first person on camera to lose to Max the Hype Nitro. While Zen's power level was reduced, and he had a few decks that could contend with him in the ecosystem, like New, Prism, Kano, Dio, etc., many felt like there was a problem with the current state of Flesh and Blood as a whole, as opposed to just Zen.
I know 2 or 3 friends that actually, I don't want to say quit the game, but they definitely took a long 6 to 9 month break. I quit. I did not play for, I think, 4 or 5 months leading up to Chicago, that tournament, because the games were so on rails. Like even when KO was there, you could try to outmath KO, but whenever Misveil hit, it just almost any deck I enjoyed or sleeved up at the time, I had to go, oh, does this lose to a Misveil hero? It does. Well, I'm gonna go try something else then, and maybe I'll go outside and touch grass tonight.
The format was simply too fast, between Kano setting up a huge wildfire turn with Kindle, to Prism setting up a massive board with Arc Lights, to Dio spamming items and ending on a high octane turn. The best decks in Flesh and Blood were decks that were fast. While New, Enigma, and Victor were slower and still definitely meta threats, it seemed like if they bricked on Disruption or drew poorly, there were often non-games where nothing they did mattered. And this was felt especially bad by decks on the fringes. Decks that were once rogue meta picks in the heavy hitters meta often ended up losing to 1 to 2 heroes from the MST triangle, and especially Kano and Prism as well. Many heroes in the game simply didn't have the tools necessary to deal with Illusionist board states, or New's Disruption, or Zen's damage, or Kano's combo. There were simply too many different fronts to fight that required completely distinct tech cards and paths for interaction. Games are often determined by die rolls, who drew better, and high roll mechanics that many felt were against the original spirit of Flesh and Blood. Up until this point, we've mostly been discussing Classic Constructed. However, Zen was also dominating in FaB's other formats, one of which is Blitz. The main distinction between Blitz and Classic Constructed is that life totals for young heroes are generally half of their adult counterparts, and deck sizes are reduced by a third, so 40 cards main deck instead of 60, or 52 cards with sideboard as opposed to 80 cards in CC. The goal of Blitz is to have more fast-paced games, and due to the 40 card limit, it is generally seen as a more casual format than Classic Constructed. However, Zen had several unique advantages over the other Blitz legal heroes. As we discussed previously, Transcend cards are basically power cards, cards that you basically are always happy to see on offense because they produce the best numbers. In CC, assuming a 60 card Zen main deck running 9 chi, 15% of the deck is chi. However, in Blitz, since the deck size is smaller, this means you can still run all 9 Transcend cards but run fewer non-power cards, bringing the total chi percentage up to 22.5%. This additional consistency in transcending meant that Zen was almost unstoppable in terms of burst potential, as nearly every turn could be a power turn. And the inclusion of Cosmic Awakening also meant he was not fatigable and could play Cosmic more often due to the higher chi density. With the usual suspects of Art of War, Bonds of Ancestry, Traverse the Universe, Zephyr Needles, and Strides of Reprisal, games would barely last 2 to 3 turns. Skirmish season began on August 24th, and I have a question for the viewers watching. How long did it take Zen to LL? Was it a year, a season or 2, maybe a few months? It took 14 days in total. Zen LL'd from Blitz in 2 weeks, in what was possibly one of, if not the fastest Living Legends a hero has ever seen. Zen officially entered the Blitz format on August 24th and left the format on September 3rd. While the Living Legend system creates historic moments that players can look back fondly on for many decks, young Zen perhaps exposed a fatal flaw in that system. Instead of Zen finding his place in a meta and seeing the deck evolve over time in response to new cards or heroes, Zen was gone before people even knew it. While there was obviously an issue with how difficult it was to balance Blitz and respond quickly, the issue with the situation went much deeper. Players had just 2 weeks to use one of the Marvel young heroes in the set, raising issues on consumer confidence and whether or not players could reasonably expect Flesh and Blood cards to be worth anything after buying a product.
We just blew Zen in Blitz to an unprecedented level. Like, it was an absolute fumble on our part, and it was frankly unfair to people who purchased cards. Like, you cannot sell a product to people and then say, yeah, there were 2 legal weeks you were allowed to play with this hero that you purchased your young Zens for. Like, that is such a fundamental drop of the ball on our part.
People afterwards were opening MST packs, getting a Marvel Young Zen, and realizing that the card was now ostensibly unplayable. LSS knew that they had a problem on their hands.
2 weeks, 2 legal weeks of chances to gather LL points. It was so fundamentally broken.
For the next few months after his LL status, Zen was no longer playable, and players felt like they had missed out on the unique gameplay the hero had to offer. In addition to the various monetary and logistical problems with Zen's speedrun to LL and Blitz, players were wondering, was LSS capable of balancing the format? At the time, the answer was no. Between July 10th and September 2nd, Zen ended up securing 1 calling win by Charles Dunn at Pro Tour Amsterdam, 3 Battlehard wins by Thomas Bailey Galbraith, Felipe Lima Cardoso, and Yoshiki Mizutani, and 5 ProQuest level wins that we may never know the winners for. I remember the brief period of 3 bonds being legal as a slightly more balanced metagame, but sometimes it largely felt like I was playing the same deck as before, but many other decks at the time like Kano, Prism, New, and Enigma were doing marginally better. After the bonds ban, other decks were able to compete just a little bit more, however Zen was still a format warping deck. While Zen's ceiling was lower just a bit so that the obscene high rolls were a little less good, with 3 Bonds of Ancestry, 3 Art of War, and Orihon of Mystic Tenants, the deck could still deal 40 to 50 damage out of nowhere. The core game plan was still largely the same: Transcend, find Art of War, block with equipment, send 1 or 2 Bonds of Ancestry, and win. Not only did the play experience of Classic Constructed begin to suffer, but the viewing experience also left a lot to be desired. Casting games during this time proved to be an even larger challenge.
I think the biggest difficulty on the casting side was actually, like, I think it's like when 2 people are doing like insanely broken shit, I don't think it's actually that hard to like vamp, because it's just like, at the end of the day, it's pretty cool to see somebody pop off for 30-40 damage, at least like once in a stream. The problem was like scouting the room to find the non-Zen mirrors in the room, because like you can't just like put on 12 games of Zen versus Zen and say like, fuck this format.
There was a sense of fatigue in seeing Zen be at the top of every tournament bracket. Zen could output insane numbers out of nowhere and kill pretty much any hero, and with how high his representation was, the Zen mirror became really common and felt incredibly die roll and draw dependent. Aside from Zen, CC also featured many heroes with incredibly one-sided matchups like Prism, Kano, and Enigma. On September 2nd, however, the design philosophy of the game would fundamentally shift, with a new set of bans. Referred to as the Great Book Burning or the Great Library Fire of 24, LSS banned many of the card advantage engines that combo decks would use in Classic Constructed, commonly referred to as books or tomes. The idea was to put a heavy restriction on offensive overlaps, and to tone down the speed of the game, with the intention of making the play patterns a bit less toxic. This banning was LSS's way of returning FaB to its roots, and the core principles the game was created under. Start full, reduce variance, every card counts, and reward good decisions and not good luck. This ban and restriction announcement sought to reduce the draw variance, lower the explosiveness of turns, and limit the amount that luck influenced the game.
It kind of made a lot of sense to me. I think, like, I'm somebody who loves Flesh and Blood, like, a lot, just, like, top down, like, I used to play, can I mention the other big card game? I played so much Magic. I played Magic for 13 years. I started like super duper young, kept up with the game from like Innistrad all the way through, I think like Streets of New Capenna. But within 2 months of starting playing Flesh and Blood, I had sold my entire Magic the Gathering collection, including like duels, like some revised stuff. Like I was like really into the game, and I just sold all of it to get into FaB within a couple months because I liked the game so much. And I was at this point where I was like, I feel like I spent $2,000 to go to Amsterdam, and the night before the tournament I chose to register Bolton to Amsterdam because I literally said I feel like none of my decisions in these games fucking matter. So I was like, I think if they didn't make that ban, I was quitting Flesh and Blood within a week or 2. So I was like, I was really stoked. I know that was like a pretty common sentiment. So I was like, I wouldn't describe myself as shocked that they did that. I don't think I expected them to kill literally every single draw spell in the entire game. But I think like it makes a lot of sense. I think they had a little bit of like a come to Jesus moment where they were like, our game is going to die if we don't do something about this, because like people are just blowing up in 3 turns at the Pro Tour. That's not good.
LSS further expanded on the rationale for these bans in the banned and restricted article. It's always been our intention to offer players ways to create offensive overlaps so the majority of games end with a hero being reduced to 0 life rather than 0 cards in deck. As of late, offensive overlaps have become too extreme and too frequent, to the point where principles of achieving victory through the accumulation of many good decisions have been eroded. The most egregious culprits are cards that immediately net additional cards without costing an action point, or are playable by heroes that are easily able to generate or bypass action points. There are many ways you can view and quantify agency. Arguments can be made that effects such as Red in the Ledger, Warmonger's Diplomacy, Siren's Call, Arclight Sentinel, Ward Board States, and even Dominate are examples of diminished agency. However, there's a massive difference between effects that diminish or restrict agency and the topic at hand, which are extreme offensive overlaps that result in a player being reduced to 0 life. There's no greater loss of agency than the game ending from forces that a player had no reasonable way to interact with. This is the most extreme loss of agency that we are looking to temper. The most notable of these bans for Zen were Art of War and Orihome, removing the 4 card advantage engines from the deck.
So we lost Art of War, we lost Orihome, and I think that was a incredibly good decision for the game. I think that probably is a pretty unanimous decision, or opinion rather, that the game's a much better place now. Zen became this kind of more fair deck where he can have these super high efficient output turns if he draws chi every turn, but typically that doesn't happen.
Art of War was such a design restricting card that it was going to get banned eventually at some point in the future. There's a couple of cards like that. I think Art of War is the first big one to get, executed behind the shed.
Additionally, Bonds of Ancestry was now entirely banned, and this ban also killed Katsu for like the 3rd time at this point.
Regarding the bans of Bonds for Katsu, it has to be one of the most disheartening bans of all time, and the one time I wish they would just go, it's only banned in ZEN, because you gave this whole entire set of Outsiders the identity of Bonds of Ancestry for Katsu. So you take away literally his whole set of cards for him, and you just leave me with Welcome to Wraith. So it's worse than like Dory. Dory gets like new warrior cards. I'm over here having to play Count Your Blessings Katsu with Flick Flax because it's the only thing that's viable for Katsu.
I think my first thought is that I like them as a competitive player because you took away a lot of chance that you got high roll in tournaments when every match is very important, but it kind of also took away a huge part of where aggro decks can break through the walls of the more defensive decks like the Guardians. I don't know how Katsu can play the Guardian.
In addition to Zen, Prism lost Tome of Divinity, which allowed her to more easily set up an Arclight loop, a powerful combo that if set up correctly could lock heroes out from playing the game entirely. Kano also lost 6 copies of his most powerful cards, Tome of Aetherwind and Tome of Fyendal, 2 cards that were basically main deck in Kano at this point, but that also allowed him to set up a powerful late game pitch deck against certain decks. Since Tome of Fyendal was generic, other decks also felt that loss, most notably Dash.io, who was capable of playing it from Arsenal to gain up to 6 life and draw 2 cards. Many of the cards that were banned were also not immediately problematic, but were banned for design space reasons. Tome of Firebrand was a card that did not see play in FaB, the only legal Draconic hero at the time, but was banned most likely for the upcoming hero Syndra, which was likely somewhere in the development pipeline at this point. Cash-In was another strange ban, which was really only used in Gasai, a hero that was not doing particularly well during MST. Cash-In was not really that big of a power card, but was definitely playable and fell into a similar vein with the other card advantage engines. Much like Tome of Firebrand, Cash-In had the potential to be overly powerful, especially when paired with future heroes that had access to more gold generation, like the heroes from High Seas. There were some surprising exceptions to the Tome ban. Blood Rush Bellow, Tome of Imperial Flame, Tome of the Arc Knight, 3 of a Kind, and Tome of Harvest. But all of these provided some restrictions or deck building costs or variants that made them significantly more borderline. In addition to the bans in Classic Constructed, Zen was also hit with an unprecedented change in Blitz. He was un-LL'd.
So often in TCGs, you are asked to find the best bad solution. There just aren't always good solutions available. So in this case, we made the decision this was the best bad solution we had.
Talking about Blitz, there's some important changes that are coming through for Blitz. So all of the heroes who are currently on the Living Legend leaderboard will have their Living Legend points doubled. That means all the heroes who are currently LL'd will stay LL'd, with the exception of ZEN. Some of you may have heard me speak recently on a LSS podcast about the ZEN situation, how I personally think it was the worst customer experience we have ever delivered to fans around the world, that a hero attained Living Legend status in the first possible season that they were legal to be played. Reflecting on that, ZEN was clearly the best deck in the format, but he had a win percentage of around 30%. That's quite high, but it's not astronomical, and by no means should any hero which has a 30% win rate attain Living Legend status in the first season that they are legal. I think at LSS we have a track record of owning our mistakes, learning from them, and moving on. I don't like to rewrite history, and typically we don't do this, but I think on this occasion, the right thing to do is to bring Zen back.
Hey James, what's up? We're not doing Blitz anymore. Wait, what are we doing instead? Silver Age. As of the recording of this video, LSS has announced plans to sunset Blitz as a competitive format, with the intention to replace it with Silver Age and organized play. However, at the time, ZEN LOing out of the format within 2 weeks was a terrible consumer experience, one that LSS had to take extreme measures to rectify.
It was an absolute fumble on our part. We had no choice but to address it in a, frankly, sloppy and haphazard manner. But what else were we supposed to do? The alternative is we are literally selling you a product that you can't use. And that would have been so unfair. So yeah, it's inelegant, it's memeable, it's laughable, but I would rather own that mistake and give the consumer back what they paid for, frankly, than just be like, nope, this is how it is, and we're sticking to our guns. I would look a fool a million times rather than offer that experience to our players.
As a brief aside, Bonds of Ancestry was so strong, it was also restricted to one single copy of the Living Legend format, making Bonds recursion lines impossible to perform in the entire game of Flesh and Blood. With this new set of bans, people thought ZEN was completely unplayable.
After they banned the Bonds and Ask for 4, I just dropped ZEN, because I just like to play Argo deck, but not like a more boring ZEN. I don't know.
And a popular opinion at the time was there would be a resurgence of KO, Assassin, and Illusionist. However, even after 2 massive bans, ZEN wasn't dead just yet. Hey everyone, it's Aurora. Thanks for watching the second part of the ZEN doc, and we hope you all enjoyed. The documentary series has been a lot of work to put together, so we appreciate everyone giving us the time to make sure we put out quality videos. The doc ended up being a lot more work than T and I initially anticipated, so we appreciate your continued patience. The next part will hopefully be out sometime in January or February, but we'll try to do our best on that. And thank you all for your continued support on the channel. We couldn't do it without you, and see you all next time.